The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Welcome once again to UNO. Consider this: a third-party candidate doesn't have a snowball's chance in Nebraska to win an election. Well, they're starting to prove that there is a chance, and in Minnesota, better than a chance. And a few other states where independent and other candidates are winning. My guests today have a very heavy interest in this subject. From the Reform Party of Nebraska, in fact, its current chairman is John Hillstrom. To his right, your left, is one of his compadres in the party, former vice chairman of the Reform Party of Nebraska, Fred Lagergren. And Andrew Sullivan is with us today. He's with the Libertarian Party of Nebraska. He calls himself a libertarian activist, and he was on the ballot in Nebraska this past election for Attorney General. I want to thank you all for being here. I think we start out with saying even the news media, unless you were in Minnesota and the environs around there, and we all knew that Jesse the Body, now the Mind, Ventura, was running for governor in Minnesota. But the day after, we woke up, most of us that weren't paying real close attention, and said, oh my God. He was a Reform Party candidate, not to mention a former pro wrestler. But we also said a third party has a shot at a major office. I mean, after you go president, Congress, you hit the governors. You must have just said a prayer, had a drink.
I was extremely proud. No, I didn't have a drink. I don't drink anymore. But I was just extremely proud. One of the things that I've noticed, though, is Time Magazine, Newsweek Magazine, the local papers, everybody dwells on the fact that he was a wrestler. And they don't even mention the fact that he ran a city government. He was mayor of a small city. That's just not covered anyplace.
Oh, I heard it.
Did you?
I heard it. I certainly did. But that obviously wasn't, it probably doesn't make as good of a story. And part of news is stories. But the thing that stuck out in my mind is that here they had a record turnout. In fact, one of the highest turnouts in the country in the state of Minnesota, which would tell me that if you have more than one viable candidate getting attention, not just on the ballot, but getting attention, and that's media, and that's a lot of other people too, the people that put on debates, etc., that not only could a third-party candidate win, and he had virtually no money compared to the $3.5 million each that the other two candidates had. He had like, what, $600,000 he spent, which includes some matching funds.
That's fabulous.
That's incredible. But it proves to me that it can not only get you votes if you're viable and you can run he ran a clever campaign, you can generate interest.
The circumstance, though, that this is taking place, we've lived with a Cold War scenario where for about 70 years you've had this country formed by two political parties. With the end of the Cold War, we're now seeing emergence of the third parties and alternative parties. In the state of Nebraska, though, we have a nonpartisan race, so we don't see much of the other parties. But in something like the state of California, they have 8 political parties out there that are actually on the ballots. Now, they'll win local elections, school boards, and city boards, but it's only recently that we've started to see it hit on the national front on major offices such as governorship. But Vermont had a socialist person get elected to the Congress. And so it is possible to happen. And I think you're going to see more of it now that the history has changed. We're in a historical end of a Cold War scenario where the parties were locked into set issues and set special interests.
And Maine, I think, just reelected an independent governor.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
I think the thing that's interesting, and I think you pointed it out to me, and I probably knew it but hadn't really internalized it, is that there are more independent under registration voters in Nebraska than for either of the two other major political parties.
That's correct.
And I don't know why people exactly register independent. I know a lot of journalists, for do because they don't want to be down as one party or another. Some are can't decide. They don't feel that they're aligned one or the other. But there are a lot that probably feel disenfranchised. Is that your thinking?
Absolutely. They're disgusted with the way the Republicans and Democrats have been running our government, and it's the people in Nebraska are changing. It's a slow change, but nevertheless they're doing it. And we in the Reform Party hope to make a much better showing at the next election, at the 4-year election, than we have in this past election.
The problem that both the Reform Party and the Libertarian Party face is when you're trying to get signatures on the ballot, you have to collect signatures from each congressional district, and trying to get on that 3rd congressional district, which is about 10 times the size of the congressional district here in Omaha. It's very difficult.
Heck, a Democrat even often has trouble
Right.
in the 3rd congressional
Right.
district in Nebraska.
And the circumstances that we're faced also is once we get people registered is trying to keep the registrations on there, because if you don't make this 5% quota on there, they're going to throw it back off the ballot. That's happened to the Reform Party in this particular election, and it happened to the Libertarian in the previous election.
Well, let's discuss that situation. Being a viable party means jumping through a ton of hoops, not just literal in terms of numbers of signatures, numbers of votes, or whatever, whatever constitutionally in any state, but it's a lot of psychological hoops. I mean, Ross Perot had to take him to court to be included in the debates. And
then he wasn't.
Right. So, I mean, what are we going to do about that? Is there a move afoot to change some of those hoops, or do you think as the interest grows you can jump the hoops and just prove it to them?
Well, it's a moving target. Every time you take
I
aim
love
at
that
it,
analogy.
every time you take aim at it, you find it's in someplace else. Now, while we were going after the FEC, dear Billy Boy did his thing, and now we're trying to figure out a way we can get him out of there. Ross has a petition drive going, but all that will do is embarrass the Clintons. What can we do about these sort of things?
Well, let's just talk specifically about getting on the ballot, getting the representation. Then we'll get into a little more
Okay.
philosophical because that's always a lot of fun.
In order to be a recognized party in Nebraska, you have to either get 5% of the votes for one particular candidacy, or that's 5% of all the votes for that candidacy. For example, Secretary of State. There was a young lady who ran for Secretary of State under the Libertarian,
Ms.
and
Miller,
she got
Shannon Miller.
7.5%. So that makes them a viable party this time. Our guy, top one, got 4%, I believe it was. And I'll have to go out and get 2,000 signatures from registered voters, sorted by county in each of the congressional districts. That means we have to have people going out into Scottsbluff and places in the West to get 2,000 signatures, or we're not recognized in the West.
Yeah, Andrew alluded to that.
It's a very hard task.
Is that unfair? Is it? Okay, let me just play devil's advocate. And in my heart of hearts, I feel that people should all have a voice. I think that's part of why I'm a journalist. I'm not trying to sound self-righteous, but isn't it fair to make people meet some requirements so that we don't have to? I mean, you could make up a party. I could make up a party tomorrow. You know, the Green Ears Party. You know, and I'm a farmer and I believe in corn and call it the Green Ears Party.
There's two aspects of that. I mean, I don't think Nebraska really has an idea, and I don't even think the United States really has a real understanding of how party politics operates in our countries. I mean, something like Northern Ireland, you have a population of 1.6 million people. They have 10 operating political parties in that area, and you have first, second, third, and fourth choice option on the ballot. Here in Nebraska, when you try to run a third-party candidacy, the problem is, first of all, half the candidacies are nonpartisan. because we are a nonpartisan state. The second thing is, once you do find a candidate to run a partisan state, area, they may do strong in one area, but not so strong in another area. So basically, a person in Omaha couldn't register for a third party unless 2,000 people register or write or petition in the 3rd Congressional District for the Reform Party. You won't be able to write in reform or vote reform in Omaha because
Which
of that.
a lot of people in western Nebraska will tell you Omaha's irrelevant anyway. So,
Right,
so
exactly.
you know, there's a disconnect there.
Right. So exactly. So if we had a partisan politics in Nebraska, you could run a candidate on, say, a city council or a county board, and they would at least be able to get the party on the ballot in that county. But they can't do that even because those particular races are nonpartisan.
Just want to mention we're not shooting anyone in the Student Center here. The pops here in the background are just people going about their business, and some weeks it's a little noisier than others.
Incidentally, in Sarpy County now, our candidate for sheriff garnered over 15% of the vote, and therefore, as a Reform Party candidate, and therefore we do not have to campaign in Sarpy County for any
For party
petition ballot.
recognition.
Ballot access.
But you have to, if you wanted to, in Douglas County.
In
I mean,
Douglas
so-
County, we have to do it.
So if you have an active group, let's say, of activists in your party, such as Andrew is in the Libertarian Party, you know, I mean, you would have to literally hop around to you know, and it always takes you know, it's a hard-working few that gets the lights going and the fire going under people.
There's also the problem with when you have people register at a political party, you have the ability to aim for them for funds to get your message out to those people when they register as a party affiliation. When the Libertarian Party goes or the Reform Party goes to get the registration forms to help solicit funds or inform people what candidates are out there, they got a very small list to choose from. When you have Democrats and Republicans monopolizing the system, they have a large group of addresses to go through, but they don't have to do much effort to get a candidate out there or to have their message put out.
What do you think we should do? Let's be a little realistic. Do you think you should be able to put anybody on the ballot? Or in a primary, let's say?
Well, right now the poll's too high. It should be lowered. It should make it easier for a party to become a recognized party in Nebraska. I don't think it was right for the Libertarians to be excluded as long as they were, and I don't think it's right for the Reform Party to be excluded now. We will be back. We're already started the petition process. But what about the Green Party, the Environmental Party, and any of the other ones? There's a U.S. Constitution Party. These people have a solid idea that they're behind, and they want to present it to us. And our form of government simply eliminates all these people. The Reform Party was a legal, recognized entity 2 years ago when Ross Perot ran for president, got 15% of the vote in Nebraska. The Secretary of State finally got around to this February putting the Reform Party on the voter registration sheets. And then
that does seem, bless his heart, it's got more.
The excuse that I got when I went down to the Secretary of State's office was that we have all these registration forms that we had printed up 4 or 5 years ago, and we need to use those up before we can put the Reform Party on the registration sheet.
Well, you know, with desktop publishing, and as fast as Kinko's can print them,
Well,
maybe we should just print a few at a time.
And the thing that plays into, there's two things that I think need to be corrected. One, I think we need to be honest about what parties are nonpartisan. I mean, this whole thing about nonpartisan races is silly. You can go down to city council here in Omaha, you know which party these council members belong to, and you know that they're active in. That nonpartisan bit should be removed because it's just deceit. The second thing I think needs to be taken into account is once a party does get ballot access, it shouldn't have to be fighting to keep it on the next election.
That's true.
They should be able to maintain that ballot access for at least 10 years or
longer
so.
grace, yeah.
So we can get the time to get people to register on there and be able to reach the public on it. But when you get thrown off the ballot, people are quickly discouraged, and they don't want to register that way. That's why you have so many independent people registered independent, because it's the only category you can go where you won't get thrown out.
I went up to Minnesota and I talked to Minnesotans up there, and to go up and meet Jesse Ventura. And you can register to vote at the polling place, and then you can vote. And Jesse went out and got so many thousands of young people who are turned off by our present politics, the way they see it, and went out and voted. And that's part of the reason he got in. Of course, there was a lot of other people that voted for him. And I think that Nebraska, you know, I look at some of Nebraska's laws, and they're antiquated laws. It's time that our Senate would do something to change some of the laws.
But there's the rub. I would imagine, from what I know of state senators, they even though it's a nonpartisan seat, they are affiliated with one of the two parties.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And it is not uncharacteristic of human beings to try to hold on to what they have.
There's another way that people can get around that, though. They actually can make, if they don't have the choice, they can at least contribute to the alternatives. The Libertarian Party, I've had to tell people, and it says, well, maybe you can't register Libertarian, or maybe you can't vote Libertarian, but you can at least give money to the Libertarian Party so we can continue to get the message out. And once the money starts drying up for the Democrats and Republicans, then the alternative parties are going to benefit from it. That's the key factor in getting the engine started on there.
Unfortunately, money is also working in newsrooms, it's been to the chagrin of many candidates, including some Democrats and Republicans that had entered races, that they weren't considered a viable candidate unless they had a war chest and were starting to place advertising, which oftentimes was with those radio and television stations. And I mean, there's this sort of, even besides the technical or legal hoops that you jump through, as I said, there's psychological hoops that different people and different groups, constituencies, if you want to call the news media a constituency, I'm not talking about votes, set up. And yet we do have to, we limit time and space. How do your parties feel particularly about the idea of news coverage and how that's approached for your candidates?
Once again, you hit the same wall. News people don't want to cover the parties that don't have a lot to say. I don't have something that's going to make news. We found it very difficult to get into any of the daily papers. The weekly papers are much easier.
Because they tend to do a little alternative kinds of things.
Well, we need to change campaign finance reform. All your independent parties, the Reform Party, Libertarians, the Greens, they all are pushing for campaign finance reform. And it's terrible the way the money is spent. In the 1996 election, I think the bottom line after everything was said and done was about $2 billion.
The thing though that caused some of the funding problems is the way, I mean, funding doesn't necessarily win elections. I think you're going to find some disagreement on what approach is to taking on that. But I think the important part is when you mention the media aspect of it, there are cases where if you don't see someone filing for stating that they're going to spend $2,000 in a war chest on it, that the press isn't going to cover it. And the media has, a good segment of the media has lost sight of the fact they're interested in covering a winner when they don't understand there are other people being represented by these other parties that need to be heard. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle.
I think the other thing is that let's just, let me paint a scenario. Let's say there are things about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party that appeal to me, one or the other. Say I lean one way or the other. But I would look at the Reform Party and I would say, this campaign reform is one of their major tenets. And I want to look into that, or I really feel strongly that at least maybe I should vote for a Reform Party candidate because no one will pay attention until people start voting with their ballots or their money. Or they might say that I believe some of the libertarian philosophy, and I imagine a lot of people do find some of those sort of hands-off and kinds of ideas appealing, especially in a state like Nebraska, full of a lot of independent thinkers. but they don't see a lot, they don't hear a lot. So you're out there, kind of out there on a street corner, hoping somebody might come by. I mean, you've got to get downright angry sometimes.
I think we go ahead if you. The circumstance I think is changing all this is things like the internet now are allowing to us much more inexpensively.
Got me able to find out what you were about.
Yes, with the internet we're allowed to get a lot better connections than we did before. One thing that's really interesting about the Libertarian Party here in Nebraska is basically all the executive officers don't reside in Lincoln or in Omaha. They all reside in some small town in Nebraska, in rural town Nebraska. And I think that's interesting because with the internet we've been able to communicate with each other when we literally have work schedules where we couldn't possibly communicate with each other.
Even if you live next door.
Right. And so this is going to change the whole politics quickly. And it allows us to inform people and give them information out that we couldn't do before.
One of the things that Ross Perot sort of had a handle on was the new technology. And he talked about sort of video, what did he talk about? Conferences and town halls and things like that. But that we, some new things are going to change the rules so that people who've had sort of control, I'm not saying they controlled the media, but they knew how to play the game and had it down pat and had momentum. They may not have the advantage that they once had.
Yeah.
Do you see that changing in the next 2 years? I mean, you're looking at the year 2000, both of you, and saying, you know, maybe we can make that next step, push farther.
I think the thrust is all there. The circumstance with simply money raising now. If a candidacy or a situation rises where a party needs to raise funds, it can be done almost overnight. Whereas before, when a campaign needed finances, they would have to go through sending out envelopes, find out if they got enough money to pay for the postage, hope that the postage system delivers it, and pray that it gets there if it doesn't get mangled. When you have a whole bit systems, people checking your website or checking email or the so forth, you have a whole set of communications to have. And another thing about that is with the solicitation that way, people can delete an email. Whereas with phone calls, people usually hang up, but they're going to read email or web pages.
So at least see who it's from.
Is
right.
that how the Nebraska Libertarian Party is raising most of their funds?
We haven't. The fundraising hasn't been. We haven't engaged much fundraising on it. But the circumstance that I think is interesting is, if I hear the Libertarian Party National can tell me, "Hey, we're going to do this project," they can tell me overnight. Now you know it, and I can just call up or do it over the internet, give them a credit card, and give the contribution to it. And that's how the projects are being done nowadays.
But it's still the barrier into the mass media. I mean, because the one thing about the internet is that you have to sort of, you have to be looking at something specifically, generally, to sort of get hooked into it.
But the difference, though, now is when the news. This is the great thing about the internet is you have so many. If anyone hasn't been on the computers
Too many options.
Yet, you go on there.
Typical computer man.
You can find the distinctions and errors that the press makes now. You can pinpoint. Find out Associated Press story, find out where they made an error, fax them an email, or email and tell them, look, you got this fact wrong, and prove them wrong. They're losing their credibility as the sole spokespersons of what's going on.
They're coming down a little off their pedestal. And
right.
So.
And so there's began to be an influx of people who began to realize that the media doesn't know it all.
Okay.
That they're not prime researchers. They're just good people trying to get a story out. And that they can't give out the whole story.
Okay, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to cover a little more territory because I am limited, unlike the internet. If you had one thing each of you to say to someone to consider, obviously you're going to talk about your party, but to the independent voter of Nebraska, at least someone that's registered, what would you say to them about alternatives out there? I'm not talking philosophy yet.
Alternatives. I would be saying to the independent, or even to the Republicans and Democrats,
you'll talk to them too,
Libertarians, that if you're unhappy with your politicians, if you're unhappy with your politics, send them a message. They can feel the heat. You send them a message by re-registering your right to vote to the Reform Party. It will send a tremendous message to them.
I would guess that that would be a good message if more than one or two people did that, huh?
Certainly would.
If I had one thing I could say to anyone on that is before the libertarians have stated government is force. Before you try to get something solved, think of an alternative to using government to solve your problems. If you're running short of ideas, contact the Libertarian Party. We have tons of ideas. www.lp.org, or just call 1-800-ELECT-US. You can do that. That's the modern technology to it.
What is your generic national
Everybody
party?
needs a PC. If we all got PCs and made sure everyone in Nebraska had one, we could.
Well, we aren't that far away, but we're getting there.
I know, but we got to get out there in the hinterlands.
I've had a PC on my desk for 10 years, right beside the phone. I've yet to plug it in.
Didn't you used to program mainframe
Yes,
computers?
sir. I fought PCs from the day they come out. I am a mainframe person.
Mainframe man. Okay, now if I'm going to give you just a little chance to give a little commercial for your parties. What are the 3 key issues for Reform Party?
Well, of course, one of them is campaign finance reform, and then term limits. We feel that there should be term limits of 3 terms for Congress, House of Representatives, and 2 terms for the Senate. Because when our country was started, all of our people that formed our government were normal, everyday Americans, and they didn't feel that they were going to go to Congress and sit there for 20 or 30 years. They were going to contribute. We have so many good people out there in this country that would gladly serve their country for 4 or 6 years, perhaps not in a congressional mode, but as an assistant secretary or secretary of a cabinet, but they don't want anything to do with it. And of course, the way we expose, first of all, you've got to give them your 1040s to see what you're making, and then you have to give them your life history. And
well, we don't have time for life history, that's for sure. We have about a minute left. I'm going to let Andrew, and then you can fill in any gaps, John.
If you want to see the Constitution enforced, have government reduced to the limits that should be in place. If you want economic freedom, if you want your personal freedom defended, the libertarians are there to do it.
To say you were a minimalist is probably overstating it, but
well, the trend is to get less government, and that's
Okay,
where we want
the
to go.
Reform Party feels the same way.
and I'm going to give you about 10 seconds. If people want to change the system with regard to letting parties involved, what should they do right now?
Change their voter registration or send us a donation.
All right, sounds good. Money, registration, or both. I want to thank you very, very much for being with us. John Hillstrom and Fred Lagergren with the Reform Party of Nebraska, and Andrew Sullivan, our immediate past candidate for the Libertarians for Attorney General. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Consider This.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health,